Question 32 of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologia in this treatise on the Passions has to do with the cause of pleasure. Now, we all can relate to pleasure, and we know what it is. We know examples of it, but what is the cause of it? It may seem like so obvious, but then when you really think about it, it's a little bit more complicated and maybe more nuanced and extensive than we first imagined. And that's where St. Thomas Aquinas comes in, because he has 8 articles on this question, 32 of Prima Secunda, starting off whether operation is the proper cause of pleasure. Now, an operation is, well, when you do something, right? You do an operation. And he says 2 things are required for pleasure, namely the attainment of the suitable good. Okay, that makes sense. And knowledge of this attainment. All right, you have to have knowledge that, you actually, have achieved the pleasure. And I think by knowledge, he's extending that to something like a dog or a cat or a caterpillar, where they are resting in the good, and they realize that they're resting in the good, whereas a rock or a twig would not have any knowledge at all. Now, each of these consists in a kind of operation, because actual knowledge is an operation, and the attainment of the suitable good is by means of an operation. Moreover, the proper operation itself is a suitable good. Wherefore, every pleasure must needs be the result of some operation. Okay, so there's something that's happening in order for pleasure to occur. All right, Article 2, whether movement is a cause of pleasure. And have you ever thought about this? If you look at a busy freeway or just everyday life or people walking down the street, they're moving for some reason, right? If they were perfectly happy, they wouldn't move, because the only reason you move is to get to some place where you think is going to be better than the place where you were previously, right? So he says three things are requisite for pleasure. 2, that is, the one that is pleased and the pleasurable object conjoined to him. And a 3rd, which is knowledge of this conjunction. Okay, that's kind of what he said last article. And in respect of these 3, movement is pleasant, as the philosopher Aristotle says. For as far as we who feel pleasure are concerned, change is pleasant to us because our nature is changeable. Okay, we're constantly changing. We're getting older. We're moving. We're breathing. We're thinking, right? I mean, the constant change in what's going on, for which reason that which is suitable to us at one time is not suitable at another. Thus, to warm himself at a fire is suitable to man in winter, but not in summer. Good observation. On the part of the knowledge itself, change becomes pleasant because man desires to know something whole and perfect. When, therefore, a thing cannot be apprehended all at once as a whole, change in such a thing is pleasant, so that one part may pass and another succeed, and thus the whole be perceived. Okay, so this is the operation of knowledge as we go from knowing part of it to all of it, and that is what St. Thomas Aquinas would call movement. If, therefore, there be anything whose nature is unchangeable, this is very interesting, the natural mode of whose being cannot be exceeded by the continuation of any pleasing object. When I first read this, I thought he was talking about God, but he doesn't say that specifically. But God cannot change, and God cannot experience pleasure in the sense that he doesn't gain anything pleasurable that he didn't already have, right? And which can behold the whole object of its delight at once. To such a one, change will afford no delight, okay? And the more any pleasure approaches to this, the more they are capable of being continual, all right? So that's a little bit deep. Whether hope in memory causes pleasure. Now think about memories that you have, hope that you have. Hope is always going to be for a good thing, right? That's by its very nature, it's an arduous good is the object. Pleasure is caused by the presence of suitable good insofar as it is felt or perceived in any way. Now, a thing is present to us in 2 ways. First, in knowledge, that is, according as the thing known is in the knower by its likeness. Secondly, in reality, according as one thing is in real conjunction of any kind with another, either actually or potentially. And again, like I've said before, St. Thomas Aquinas had a very, very deep understanding of the human person. Okay, he wasn't just about metaphysics. He was a psychologist. He was a student of human nature. And it just blows me away that somebody who is so intelligent would also have such a great understanding of human nature. All right, so since actual is greater than potential conjunction, therefore, the greatest pleasure is that which arises from sensation, which requires the presence of the sensible object. The second place belongs to the pleasure of hope, wherein there is pleasurable conjunction, not only in respect of apprehension, but also in respect of the faculty or power of obtaining the pleasurable object. Okay, so hope is always something in the future, whereas pleasure is something that you're enjoying at the moment. The third place belongs to the pleasure of memory, which has only the conjunction of apprehension. Okay, it's something in you. This would be a common sense, as St. Thomas Aquinas calls it, that something in the past. So really, in this paragraph, he covered present, future with hope, present with pleasure, and past with memories, but they all kind of converge on the present in some way. Does sadness cause pleasure? Now you might think, well, of course it doesn't. When you're sad, you're not happy, so why would you be experiencing pleasure? But this is quite interesting. He says sadness may be considered in two ways, as existing actually and as existing in the memory. And in both ways, sadness can cause pleasure. Now, how can a present sadness cause pleasure? Because sadness as actually existing causes pleasure inasmuch as it brings to mind that which is loved, the absence of which causes sadness, and yet the mere thought of it gives pleasure. All right, so you're sad because you lost a loved one. Your grandmother or grandfather died, but you love them. So even though you're sad and you've lost them, it gives you an opportunity to think about them, and that will cause pleasure. The recollection of sadness becomes a cause of pleasure on account of the deliverance which ensued, because absence of evil is looked upon as something good. And Augustine says, oftentimes in joy we call to mind sad things, and in the season of health we recall past pains without feeling pain. All right, so very interesting. Article 5, whether the actions of others are a cause of pleasure in us. He says the action of another may cause pleasure in us in three ways. First, from the fact that we obtain some good through the action of another. Well, obviously, if they're doing something good to us, we obtain good. Secondly, from the fact that another's action makes us to know or appreciate our own good. And for this reason, men take pleasure in being praised or honored by others. Okay, so they remind us of our goodness. When they do something good for us, it's because we are good and they wanna help us. So it is pleasant to be loved and admired by others, inasmuch as man thus becomes aware of his own goodness or greatness through their giving pleasures to others. Thirdly, from the fact that another's actions, if they be good, are reckoned as one's own good by reason of the power of love, which makes a man to regard his friend as one with himself. And on account of hatred, which makes one to reckon another's good as being in opposition to oneself, the evil action of an enemy becomes an object of pleasure. So remember, we talked about this previously with friendship. It's really like a uniting of two people, because you are united in a common goal and a common love for each other. And so it's really a very beautiful teaching. Whether doing good to another is a cause of pleasure. Doing good to another may give pleasure in three ways. First, in consideration of the effect, which is the good conferred on another in this respect, inasmuch as though being united to others by love, we look upon their good as being our own. Okay, so when you help somebody, you really, in a sense, are helping yourself, because you see in them another you. Second, in consideration of the end, as when a man from doing good to another hopes to get some good for himself, either from God or from man, for hope is a cause of pleasure. Thirdly, in consideration of the principle, and thus doing good to another can give pleasure in respect of a threefold principle. Okay, so now the third one is divided into three. One is the faculty of doing good, and in this regard, doing good to another becomes pleasant insofar as it arouses in a man an imagination of abundant good existing in him, whereof he is able to give others a share. Wherefore men take pleasure in their children and in their own works as being things on which they bestow a share of their own good. Okay, I have children. When I look at them, I see myself. I see the good in them as a reflection of my own good. And so there you go. Another principle is man's habitual inclination to do good, by reason of which doing good becomes connatural to him. The third principle is the motive. For instance, when a man is moved by one whom he loves to do good to someone, for whatever we do or suffer for a friend is pleasant, because love is the principal cause of pleasure. Okay, this is really, fascinating stuff. Is likeness a cause of pleasure? Likeness is a cause of unity, hence that which is like us as being one with us causes pleasure, just as it causes love. And if that which is like us does not hurt our own good, but increase it, it is pleasurable simply. For instance, one man in respect of another, one youth in relation to another. But if it be hurtful to our own good, thus accidentally it causes disgust or sadness, not as being like the one with us, but as hurtful to that which is yet more one with us. And so he makes a comparison of two potters. They create the same thing and they have a likeness, but they're competing with each other. Or maybe two beautiful women competing with the same man. They see a likeness in each other as beautiful women, but they also see each other as a threat as well. Whether wonder is a cause of pleasure. And you might remember earlier in the Summa, in Prima Pars, he talks about wonder. And, Aristotle says all philosophy begins with wonder. And this is a very beautiful, short paragraph. He says, it is pleasant to get what one desires, and therefore the greater the desire for the thing loved, the greater the pleasure when it is attained. Indeed, the very increase of desire brings with it an increase of pleasure, according as it gives rise to the hope of obtaining that which is loved. Desire resulting from hope is a cause of pleasure. Now, wonder is a kind of desire for knowledge, a desire which comes to man when he sees an effect of which the cause either is unknown to him or surpasses his knowledge or faculty of understanding. And St. Thomas, in case you didn't watch that video, says that when we look out into the world and we see the sky and the birds and the butterflies and the dogs and the fellow human beings, we should be filled with awe and wonder, and that should allow us to see these as effects of a cause. And then we wonder about the cause. We want to know, where did it come from? And this is the beginning of a desire for God, okay? Wherefore we can come to know that God exists just through our experience of the natural world. For this reason, whatever is wonderful is pleasing, for instance, things that are scarce. For the soul rejoices in comparing one thing with another, because comparison of one thing with another is the proper and connatural act of the reason. All right, so I know this was kind of a long question with 8 articles, but it was a lot of really good information. I hope you enjoyed it, and I thank you for going through the Summa one question at a time, and we hope to see you tomorrow. God bless you.